Kurt Cobain didn't like being called the voice of a generation, but he kind of was. Nirvana burst onto the scene and Kurt played in a way that felt like anyone could play, even if you had never picked up a guitar before in your life. The music felt inclusive. The popular music that was prominent before Nirvana was full of larger-than-life bands with virtuoso musicianship and rock god personas. Kurt Cobain's songs were not perfect. They're filled with angst and they address things like social alienation, self-doubt, isolation. He had quite a sloppy style of playing guitar. He had a scratchy and powerful, perfect but imperfect voice, and he expressed what the youth were feeling through his music. Kurt Cobain was an outstanding melody writer, one of the best that rock music has ever seen, and I don't care if he knew what he was doing or not in theoretical terms, because it just does not matter. He wrote really sophisticated melodies instinctively, simply because it's what his ears were drawn to. Now, with sophisticated melodies usually comes sophisticated chords and harmony. But Nirvana wasn't about technical sophistication. People loved them because they were saying the things that they felt, and the rawness and the power of the music that they played expressed the feelings that they felt. Nirvana came from new wave and punk. They played riffs and power chords. And if you want to make powerful music, then what better chords to use than power chords? I've said it before, power chords are power chords because they sound powerful. Power chords are not major or minor. They have fewer notes, meaning there's less chance of melodies clashing with the chord tones. The fact there's less information, as in less notes in the chords, means they're easier to put together into riffs and chord sequences. And the frequency relationship between the two notes in a power chord makes them sound bigger and more powerful. But Kurt Cobain didn't play his power chords as most people do. He would play his power chords like this, with a flattened finger. This actually meant that when he played his power chords on the 5th string root, he would occasionally be hitting this note too, meaning he would sometimes be playing a major chord instead of a power chord. He would also flatten his finger like this when he played power chords on the 6th string as well, meaning he would sometimes be adding this note, which makes this a sus4 chord. This adds an element of suspense. I don't know if these were intentional or not, and again, I really don't think it matters, but these added extensions or accidentals added to the power chords adds more intensity, adds more of an unresolved sound, and it really adds to the raw, imperfect energy of his playing and his songwriting. Another thing that he would do which added to this raw sound would be to bend notes in his riffs, and even sometimes to his power chords and his progressions in his riffs, so they would go slightly out of tune. The youth of the 90s were getting tired of this perfectly played music and the fancy, epic guitar solos. They wanted something that sounded like they felt. They wanted something raw. And this is what they got. The punk way of writing chord progressions is pretty straightforward. You just take this power chord shape, you play it in different places on the guitar neck, you put these together into a sequence that you like the sound of, and there you have it. You've got yourself a riff or a chord progression. But when listening to Nirvana's songs, there is a particular chord change that Kurt seemed to be drawn to using. He would often create his patterns and his chord progressions that included moving up or down a minor third interval. All this simply means is that he would take a power chord and then go up or down by 3 frets. Adding this type of chord change can sound edgy, but not completely out of place in the context of a chord progression. If you want to add a little bit of that Nirvana sound to your writing, give it a try. Just come up with a sequence of power chords that you like the sound of, but at some point in the progression, make sure you go to a power chord that's played 3 frets higher or lower than the chord that you started on. I recently read Dave Grohl's book, The Storyteller. In this book, he talks about how much he and Kurt loved the Pixies. Now, the Pixies were known for their loud and quiet dynamic changes. Nirvana adopted this idea into their music too. One moment they would be playing a section that's quite calm and edgy, almost haunting and somber, or however you would describe what they sounded like. Then they would suddenly switch to this loud and raucous and almost on the edge of losing control. It was almost like an explosive mood change in the music, and they were so good at doing this. Nirvana was almost the antithesis of the popular music that came before them, so it did surprise me recently when I realised that Nirvana actually had quite a lot of solos in their songs. But Kurt Cobain's solos were different. His solos were never there to display his technical prowess as a guitarist. They were always there to fit the mood of the song. In a three-piece band, although I know Nirvana did become a four-piece, it's quite easy for the music to dip in energy when the guitar breaks from doing the rhythm parts to go into a guitar solo. And also I want to add that Nirvana didn't usually use any overdubbed rhythm guitar parts in their albums during the solo sections to stop this dip in energy. And I think doing this helped to keep that raw sound that the band had when they played live and implement that sound into their albums. But one thing that I think is overlooked when soloing, which Kurt did quite a bit, is just playing the melody. You really can't go wrong as a guitar player by just playing the melody. We know the melody works, so why don't we ever play it? It seems so simple, but we often want to craft our solos with licks and runs and show off our skills as guitarists. You don't need to just play the melody as just the notes. You can use the articulations that you have at your disposal as a guitarist. You can use bends, hammer-ons, pull-offs, slides, vibratos. Use the things that make the guitar sound cool to play the melody. But this isn't all he did. Kurt Cobain played with a lot of aggression, and he had a huge sound. And he would play around with things that didn't sound conventional. But always keep in mind that the solo needs to fit the vibe of the song. So if it's an aggressive sounding song, try and come up with something that sounds aggressive. If it's a song that sounds quite weird and a bit different, try experimenting with something that sounds a bit weird and different. And if in doubt, just play the melody. Here's a few techniques that I think will help you if you're looking to add some of the Kurt Cobain sound to your soloing. Kurt Cobain would use a really narrow, fast vibrato. Vibrato is one of the most expressive techniques that lead guitarists can use, and it's an essential skill that a lead guitarist should work on. But like everything with Kurt Cobain's guitar style, he didn't play it perfectly. He had quite a wild and erratic vibrato, so start slowly when you're practicing it, and the goal is to try and get it to have an intense, vibrating type of sound. He would play tritones. A tritone is when you play a root note and a flat 5 interval. So to put this simply, if you take a power chord shape where you take the second note of the shape and move it back by a semitone. This has a really cool sound that he would use when he wanted something to sound aggressive or maybe a bit out there. Hitting the wrong strings and keeping open strings droning while playing a lead line or a melody can add a bigger and fuller sound to your melodies, and it also can add to that noisy, imperfect sound that we love in his playing. You just need to make sure that you aren't muting all of the strings when you're playing your solos, and also that it doesn't really matter if you hit the wrong strings or multiple strings at the same time. Now this might actually be a bit harder than you think at first, because it's a bit contradictory to how we learn to mute the strings so we don't hear the wrong notes when we normally play. Nirvana was all about energy, angst, and not being perfect. His guitar playing style really embodied this, and I don't know if he meant to play like this or not, and to be honest, who cares? I talked in the video I made on Dave Grohl's songwriting about the importance of connecting with the audience. Kurt Cobain wrote songs about how he was feeling, and it just so happened that lots of other people connected with it. I doubt that he ever expected the music that he made to resonate with people in the way that it did. Kurt Cobain didn't like being called the voice of a generation, but he, his guitar playing and his songwriting kind of were.